Jeremiah.
And you can do that app in DNA test.
Not Jeremiah.
Everything else good?
What's your middle name?
But he's got the two little
Huh? Daniel? Daniel? I thought that was your last name. You remember that trick I showed you the other night? How to poke your head through the hole? Remember those? You remember how to take your eyeball out and clean it?
Good morning. Good? Yeah. It's easier for Bible class that way.
DNA test. Josh is and they have to be him. And he's a single dad. But we can, I just thought she did some observing.
All right, I hate to be that guy, but somebody's got to do it. Morning, everybody.
Good morning.
I told Brian, Nicole, but I was mistaken. I need to tell you. There is an increase in tithes to the church every time a new vehicle is purchased. So you can make that check up personally to me if you'd like. I'm just kidding. I would be my own worst enemy with that rule. All right, we are in the very last chapter of Acts today, Acts chapter 28. We are going to finish this book this morning, and as February rolls in, we are going to be starting in the book of Romans. So we're just changing the page, flipping the page next month, and going to keep on going. So far, through Acts, we've seen Christ, the beginning of the church, and we've started to follow the church all the way through. Now we've been following Paul for quite some time now, and his story, basically from the beginning, we saw his conversion from being a Christian persecutor to now being one of the workers for God. And so we've been following his story this whole time through many trials and many victories, many times when we thought he's not going to get out of this. He's going to be in jail for years and years. We've seen that happening. Or he's dead. We've basically seen that happening as well, where they basically stoned him to death thinking he was dead, and he was not yet. And so we've kind of followed this whole saga of Paul through the Acts here. And we kind of came to a pretty dramatic halt on the shores last week in chapter 27. We read about his journey. Well, he's still a prisoner. That's correct. But his journey on the ship as they set sail for Rome, as he's going to come before Caesar. That's the whole point here. And so he's with the crew, and we talked about kind of the different rapport and stuff he built with these guys on the ship, and from their transition onto the other ship, and how he obviously saw as not just any old prisoner that they needed to take care of. He obviously had kind of a good standing. They said, go, meet your friends on shore, come back before we leave, type of thing. But the reason that I think we read a lot about that and that was important is when we were coming towards the end of chapter 27, we get to the shipwreck. And that's where we ended and we talked about last week. But Paul was saying, basically, he was saying on behalf of God, God has told me that we will all survive this shipwreck. This is towards the end of chapter 27. And it's not the fact that they didn't believe him, it's just that they didn't really believe him, did they? And so they kept trying everything in their human will because they're the captain and the owner of the ship. They're going to do everything they can to try and save the ship. And Paul says, we will survive, but none of this ship is gonna. You're going to have to shipwreck. And that's right where we ended. They hit the shores. They struck a reef in verse 41 is what my version says. Some versions say a sandbar. It doesn't matter too much. In verse 41 of chapter 27, and the bow was stuck and remained, and the stern was being broken apart by the surf. So that gives you a good picture of a shipwreck, right? Stuck into the sandbar, solid, but the back of the ship is being broken by the waves. So let's go ahead and read verse 42 through the last three verses here, 27, and then we'll read chapter 28. So the boat's stuck, it's being broken apart by the surf. Verse 42 of 27. But the centurion, wishing to save Paul, kept them from carrying out the plan. He ordered that those... Oh, sorry, here, verse 42. I went 43. The soldiers' plan was to kill the prisoners, lest they should swim away and escape. But the centurion, wishing to save Paul, kept them from carrying out their plan. He ordered those who could swim to jump overboard first and make for land, and the rest of the planks would be on planks and pieces of the ship. So it was that they were all brought safely to land. So where we ended the last few words of 27, what was true? What Paul had said the whole time, right? Or what God had told Paul the whole time. Everyone would arrive alive, even though the shipwreck would still happen. And there for a second, here in these few verses, it was even debated whether the prisoners would be killed or not, which would have invalidated what Paul had said. But the decision was made that they would trust the prisoners enough that they would land on shore. Which really, if you think about it, in the middle of a storm, that's not that big of an ask. They're not going to swim out to sea against a storm. They're going to probably end up on the shore with you, right? So that's where we ended chapter 27. They shipwrecked and they all landed safely on the shore. Did anybody have any thoughts they didn't get to talk about last week on 27? I want to make sure we don't skip it. Nancy. Not yet.
Okay, they're talking about why would he appeal to Caesar?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and so I was reading and I was like, oh, maybe this is why. In Acts 23:11, the following night the Lord stood by him and said, "Have courage, for as you have testified me in Jerusalem, so you must also testify in Rome."
Mm-hmm.
So I thought maybe that's why he appealed to Caesar so he could get to Rome.
That's a good thought. What chapter was that again, Nancy?
Acts 23:11.
Okay.
And then I thought, what's everybody know? So maybe that's why he appealed, because it knew that would get him to Rome, because he was told you have to go to Rome.
Well, and if you remember, when just a few weeks ago when we read chapter 23, I read that verse and I said, and that is what the rest of the book is about, is him going to Rome, which is true. We're talking about he's almost there now. He's shipwrecked, but he's on his way. Yeah, that's a good point. He heeds the words of God, and he might be thinking that through. That's a good thought. Yeah, Dennis.
He actually wanted to go as far as Spain.
Mm-hmm.
Say what now?
He wanted to go to Spain, it says somewhere.
Yeah, they, in some places say he made it, and I'm trying to figure out what it is, and I think it's Maccabean's letters that talk about him going to Spain, but that's the only thing, but, yeah, to them, according to their writings, he did go to Spain, but I tried to figure it out with this stuff here, but I can't.
Yeah, I think we end too early here in Acts,
Yeah.
too, to know, to continue the story of Paul on that, I guess. All right, anything else in chapter 27? So they're shipwrecked, they're on the beach. Where in the world are they at? That's right, where we're picking up here in chapter 28.
Say you know,
They're shipwrecked on the beach. Where are they at?
60 miles south of Sicily.
Sicily. All right. So that's a good way to say that, too, because we kind of can guesstimate that now. Modern times. All right, let's pick up in 28, where it says they're on Malta. Okay? 28, verse 1. After we were brought safely through, we learned that the island was called Malta. The native people showed us unusual kindness, for they kindled a fire and welcomed us all, because it had begun to rain and it was cold. When Paul had gathered a bundle of sticks and put them on the fire, a viper came out because of the heat and fastened on his hand. When the native people saw the creature hanging from his hand, they said to one another, "No doubt this man is a murderer. Though he escaped from the sea, justice has not allowed him to live. He, however, shook off the creature into the fire, and he suffered no harm. They were waiting for him to swell up or suddenly fall down dead. But when they had waited a long time and saw no misfortune come upon him, they changed their minds and said that he was a god. Let's go ahead and pause there for a second. Things really got interesting when they got on the island, right? We have a couple of quick chops to where we get to the fire scene, right? They're on the island. They find out it's Malta. They meet the natives. Natives are hospitable. Well, that's good. Nobody died yet again. But then they start building a fire to keep warm because it's raining. And what happens here in this piece of the story? Yeah, I think it's kind of cool how we even have a descriptor of what kind of snake it is. So we can't just be like, oh, the gardener snake didn't kill him. It was a viper, right?
Which is one of the deadliest snakes in the world.
Still to this day.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. So he's building the fire, and in the firewood is the snake, the viper that bites him. And it's we just get good imagery. It says it's clamped onto him and dangling, and he shakes it off into the fire. All right, that's pretty cool. But he still bit you, Paul. So what does the local natives have to say about that?
I think, because people have been bitten by snakes.
Sure.
In today's time, you don't immediately say, this must be a murderer who got bit by a snake,
Okay.
It's like, what kind of, people get bit. Why, immediately,
Well, okay, let's talk about that for a second, because we don't do it on snakes, but this mindset still lives heavily in the world. We call it, probably the most one that we jokingly call is karma, right? Karma, what goes around comes around. And so basically they're saying, well, obviously this guy's a murderer because he went through a shipwreck and he survived that. He wasn't supposed to, and so the beings at be made him be bit by a snake. He's definitely a murderer. But that didn't last very long in their mindset, did it? Because the same mindset that says this person must be a murderer takes someone who can be bitten by a viper and not die, and they make him, what mine says is a god. They say he must be a god.
It doesn't address why he didn't die from this, but we know that God works miracles.
Well, let me ask your question with your answer to last week. He's going to Rome. He's supposed to go to Rome, right? And, God will do whatever he's going to do to make sure that he does get to Rome, right? And so I think it doesn't go into how God did it or what happened here, if this was just a non-venomous viper or if God just made it not happen, whatever.
Right.
But we know that the call is still go to Rome, so he's still going to survive to do that, right?
Yeah, I don't know if it's true with all snakes, but rattlesnakes, they'll bite you once in a while and not inject you, depending on what they want, because it takes a lot of energy to refill those deals. So unless they're for food or whatever, or whatever, they will not inject you. They'll bite you to scare you off. But, so I don't know if that's what this viper did or not. But anyway, it doesn't matter if he injected him or not. God works miracles.
Yeah.
He can do whatever. He raises people from the dead. What the heck, this is nothing here.
Yeah, absolutely. And a very, very important part, we can worry about how it happened, but the important part is that it was weird and crazy that it happened. Because we know the natives who would know the snake think he's going to fall over and die. They're like, okay, well, we're going to have to carry this guy away pretty quick. Because they knew the normal was a viper bites you, it's over.
And they're just sitting there staring at him.
Yeah, they are.
What's happening?
In your mind movie, in your picture, right, it's like, he's not dead. It's been 35 minutes. He must be a god. And everybody, he's a god, and so they're kind of, it's crazy how they're watching him so closely. Dennis?
It's interesting what he does as a god, but there's a couple of cases previous, one in Acts, where people said, oh, the voice of a god, not of a man, and he wallowed in it, and they kept saying it, and God struck him down with worms, and he died.
Mm-hmm.
And there was another incident like that in the Old Testament, a very similar deal, I can't remember in particular. But in this one, he didn't die when they said it. It just tells me that he either dealt with it gently and took care of it, or else he gave it no heed or whatever, but he didn't wallow in it
Mm-hmm.
like Herod had done, and evidently, or he had suffered the same fate. Just because he was an apostle didn't make him unkillable or unpunishable by God. So he went and instead of being eaten by worms, he turned around and healed a whole bunch of them, you know.
Right, which is where we're going to pick up here in verse 7 in a second. But the point of Dennis's comment that's really good is God didn't strike people dead because people thought they were gods. God struck people dead because they thought they were gods, right? And that's the whole difference. Obviously, we don't hear any dialogue from Paul after they say, "Oh, he must be a god." But obviously, it was not one where he took that and made that his heart of, "Oh yeah, I'm God now." Obviously, that wasn't the case. But what he does is he continues to go work for God. He kind of just, as Dennis said, he must have brushed it off or took it kindly or just didn't worry about it too much.
This is the second time anyway we've done that way. Him and Barnabas,
Mm-hmm.
whatever it was they considered Zeus, Paul Zeus and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
God knows their heart. He knew Herod's heart, and he knew Paul's heart.
Say yes?
God knew Herod's heart, the one that was eaten by worms, and then he knows about Paul's heart.
Yeah.
He knows Paul.
I think that's probably 14 or 15, chapter 14 or 15 that was happening. All right. So he's bitten by the snake. He's God. He's still alive, right? That's where we stopped. That's where people think he's at. Verse 7. Let's see what he does after that. Now in the neighborhood of that place were lands belonging to the chief man of the island, named Publius, who received us and entertained us hospitably for 3 days. It happened that the father of Publius lay sick with fever and dysentery. And Paul visited him and prayed, and putting his hands on him, healed him. And when this had taken place, the rest of the people on the island who had diseases also came and were cured. They also honored us greatly, and when we were about to sail, they put on board whatever we needed. All right, just a quick pause. We only read a couple of verses. It's interesting, Paul never addresses in what we have recorded from Luke if he's a god or not. But then he just goes on and starts healing the natives. Starting with the leader of the island's father, who was about to die, it sounds like. He healed him. And then other people that needed healed and cured came from the island, and they were also healed. It's very interesting. I think maybe part of the reason why that's happening is because, again, Paul's going to get to Rome, and God's going to give him the ability to get to Rome. And part of that is the natives helping them. I mean, think about this. They don't have a boat. They don't have supplies. They're going to need a little cooperation from the natives. And so we don't know if Paul addressed that he was a god or he just kind of rolled with it for a little bit while God was working through him. But what we do know is he prayed and he put his hands on them. He didn't say, "This is my being." He showed that it was God's healing through it, I think, through the prayer part. I think that was kind of pointed out to us. Any other comments up to this point?
Well, he just couldn't speak it and heal him. He laid hands on him.
He did, yeah. And so that kind of shows the practice of it being godly as well. He prayed and he laid hands on them. It wasn't just like, "You're healed and you're healed." Like a god could do that, right? But he just really showed that he was just the vessel for the work.
Good thing they didn't kill Paul,
Yeah, good thing they didn't kill Paul.
because he saved all of them. Well, he didn't.
Yeah, then there was multiple opportunities. The most recent one was right as they were shipwrecking and just trying to figure out if they should kill all the prisoners, right? And so, yeah, good thing they didn't kill Paul. Dennis.
Sometimes we read it, and some of our Bibles use the word barbarians. A better word for it in our language would be the locals there.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't just a bunch of pygmies from Borneo, hedge hunters or something. They were typical Mediterranean people.
Mm-hmm.
And that guy named Publius, that was a Roman or a Latin name given to a leadership type fellow. A name that's also a title that kind of like the word Christ. Christ ain't really a proper name, it's a title. it's, but they weren't a bunch of, people boiling cannibals and stuff like
Yeah.
that. They were regular people, probably not much different than people on the mainland.
They were descendants of Phoenicians.
Yes, they
Which
were.
I don't know if they were Greek or what. I know above Israel is the same Phoenicians up there, Sidon and all that. If I remember right, and I might be wrong, they came from Greece, I believe. I'm not positive about that.
But everything, even that island was under Roman rule at the
Yeah.
time, and anyway, we get the idea it was a bunch of these, people like you watch on National Geographic, eating monkeys and beating on hollow logs. That ain't what they were.
Well, my version says native people, which, that's a better terminology for that. So we know the ones that lived on the island. Courtney.
Mine, and the footnote says Greek barbari, that is non-Greek speakers, so they just didn't
Oh.
speak Greek.
Okay. So that's interesting. That's probably why we get the word barbarian, barbari, as non-Greek speakers, and we just kind of take that a whole different direction. Yes, I am. Most of the time. Huitos, there you go. No, I'm not. I don't know. I can't speak Greek very well at all. All right, verse 11. Chapter 28, verse 11. So they set sail from where they were shipwrecked from the help of the natives, and we pick up in verse 11. After 3 months, we set sail in a ship that had wintered on the island, a ship of Alexandria, with the twin gods as a figurehead, that's the Greek gods, probably Castor and Pollux. Pulling in at Syracuse, we stayed there for 3 days. And from there we made a circuit and arrived at Rhegium, I think. Say Rhegium. Rhegium. I don't know. After 1 day, a south wind sprang up, and on the second day we came to Puteoli. And we found brothers, and were invited to stay with them for 7 days. And so we came to Rome. And the brothers there, when they had heard about us, came as far as the Forum of Appius and the 3 taverns to meet us. On seeing them, Paul thanked God and took courage. And when he came into Rome, Paul was allowed to stay by himself with a soldier who guarded him. After 3 days, he called together the local leaders of the Jews. And when they had gathered, he said to them, "Brothers, though I had done nothing against our people or our customs or our fathers, yet I was delivered as a prisoner from Jerusalem into the hands of the Romans. When they had examined me, they wished to set me at liberty, because there was no reason for the death penalty in my case. But because the Jews objected, I was compelled to appeal to Caesar, though I had no charge to bring against my nation. For this reason, therefore, I have asked to see you and speak with you, since it is because of the hope of Israel that I am wearing this chain." And when they said to him, "We have received no letters from Judea about you, and none of the brothers coming here have reported or spoken any evil about you. But we desire to hear from you what your views are, for with regard to this sect, we know that everywhere it is spoken against." We'll just pause there for a second and talk about some of the answers given here. We ended at verse 22. Yeah. All right, so they get to Rome, essentially is what the first part we worked through is they get to Rome, which helps them by some other people and some transitions. We get to Rome, and when Paul gets to Rome, he is put under what we would call house arrest. He has freedom, he has his own space, but he is still being guarded by a guard, right? And so what happens after he arrives to Rome and he's there in house arrest? What is the dialogue that begins here? Let me tell you who's coming to see him, and then maybe you can answer. He called together the local leaders of the Jews, and they gathered. So he called the church, right, at the time, the Jews. He called the religious leaders together, and he wanted to kind of make his case and tell his story and say why he was there.
Even though Paul was the apostle for the Gentiles, he always started out with the Jews.
Yep.
Always tried to start out with the Jews. You know, and it's a good thing, some of them believed, some of them didn't, but at least some of them did, so. I don't have my hearing aids on, so I can't hear you very good, so I'm having a hard time trying to see what you're saying.
Well, okay, perfect. So what do the Jews say, though, or what is the conversation between Paul and the Jews?
They don't have any knowledge about it, they don't know why he's here, nobody's written anything for it.
Absolutely. So what Paul says is he starts to tell his story, and, you know, kind of imagine this as you were saying it. He probably is sharing it a little defensively, some too, because the Jews are who's after him. He's sharing about how he was brought before and he was charged by the Jews, and for this reason, because they were basically going to kill me, I appealed to Caesar, and that's why I'm here in Rome. And their response to all of that is, we haven't heard anything from that crazy group of Jews. They kind of say that, right? They say, where did I stop here? 20. Yeah, so let's go backwards to 21. We received no letters from Judea about you, and none of the brothers are coming here have reported and spoken evil about you. But we desire to hear from you what your views are. From with this regard to this sect, we know that everywhere it is spoken against. Kind of that last line is kind of a little, those are the crazy Jews, right? This sect, everywhere they're spoken against. But instead of hearing what they are charging you with, we desire to hear your views. That's a big change in kind of the terminology and the mindset, right? So we go back to the Jews in Jerusalem where this all started. Their question was not, we desire to hear your views. Their answer was, stop saying your views, we want to kill you. And he gets to Rome, and the question is posed, what are your views? What is this that you're saying that is causing people all of this trouble? We want to know what you're saying. So it's very interesting how it's shifted so much. Just geography and people have changed this. Maybe God too. All right, any other comments through 22 is where we stopped.
It's interesting they use the word sect
Uh-huh. For
the Christians. For Christianity, they call it a sect.
and let's see here.
They still think of them as part of the Jewish religion, but they're
Yeah, it's kind of, I wonder how we could, I don't know how to make that more like something we could think about. The clique, it's like a clique within the church.
What verse is that?
That would be 22.
Denomination.
Yeah, and denomination's not even a great descriptor for us because we kind of consider them not even Jews, like not even Christians, but they're still considering these Jewish Christians, kind of is how they're all tied together.
The plain English and the contemporary English says new group.
This new group, which is what they are, right? And that's how Festus and everybody knew of them as the way and such like that. So, yeah, just a separate group within the Jews. Little do the Jews know that it's so much more than that, isn't it? All right.
There's another one that calls it this movement.
what?
Movement, this movement. Which that changes it from the people to the happenings.
All right, let's pick up in 23 here. When they had appointed a day for him, they came to him at his lodging in great numbers. From the morning till evening he expounded to them, testifying to the kingdom of God and trying to convince them about Jesus, both from the law of Moses and from the prophets. And some were convinced by what he had said, and others disbelieved. And disagreeing among themselves, they departed after Paul had made one statement. The Holy Spirit was right in saying your fathers through the Isaiah the prophet. Go to this people and say, you will indeed hear but never understand, and you will indeed see but never perceive. For the people's heart has grown dull, and with their ears they can barely hear, and their eyes they have closed, lest they should see with their eyes, and hear with their ears, and understand with their heart, and turn, I would heal them. Therefore, let it be known to you that this Salvation of God has been sent to the Gentiles. They will listen. He lived here 2 years at his own expense and welcomed all who came to him, proclaiming the kingdom of God and teaching about the Lord Jesus with all boldness and without hindrance. Kind of a pretty quick end to the book of Acts. But where we stopped in 23, he was still under house arrest, but he had gotten the opportunity to make his case a little bit. And then where we ended, they said, well, tell us more about it. Tell us about this sect or this group or these Christians or whatever you guys are. And where we hop back in is they appointed a day. They gave him an opportunity to speak to the crowds, basically, right? They said, we booked you an auditorium. Come out on Thursday at 7 and give your spiel, right? And he did. And what happened when he gave the story, and it shares here that he shared about Jesus from the perspective of the law of Moses and the prophets. So he came to the Jews and he told them their whole history and ended it with Jesus. What was their answer to that?
Some believed and others said, I do not believe.
Interesting. Very similar to any time we share the gospel.
Yeah.
Paul's response is incredible, though. I'll come back to you in a second.
Say
Nancy.
what about Paul?
Paul's response to seeing the crowd being divided is incredible. He basically says, remember this history we've been talking about? This history said some of you would believe and some of you would be against me. He shares from the prophet Isaiah, and he says, I'm going to sum up kind of what he says. He says, there will be some who speak and some who hear with their ears and see with their eyes and believe in their heart. And there will be those who instead close their eyes and close their ears so they can close their heart. Those that can see and hear will believe, and those that close will never know. And that's basically what he says to the response of, some of you opened your eyes and ears. Some of you chose to ignore me. That's kind of what his response was. Nancy?
That's Jesus' parable about the good soil and the stony soil.
Absolutely. The parable of the soil, right? That's what Nancy was saying is, you throw some and it's rocky and it doesn't grow up. You throw some and it gets choked out. You throw some and it grows healthily. But it is funny that Paul calls them out for it right as they're saying, right as they're about to leave or however that worked out, as he says, you should know this is how it's going to be. From the prophet Isaiah, he's like, remember we've been talking about Isaiah this whole time? He's like, you should know. Courtney first?
All right, so some translations include verse 29, which he says, in 28, he says, therefore let it be known to you that this salvation of God has been sent to the Gentiles. They will listen. And then 29 says, and when he had said these words, the Jews departed, having much dispute among themselves. And I just want to point out, it happened again. He said the bad G word, Gentiles, and all the Jews pieced out because they've sold themselves to this exclusive group so deeply that Gentiles aren't even humans to them hardly. And I mean,
And the wording is great when you read that verse. And they departed, and they had much disputes among themselves. Have you ever went and heard something, and you heard somebody speak it, and you're like, you just didn't know how to feel about it. You didn't know whether or not that was completely wrong, and you wanted to roast them after, I need to write a strong chain email about this guy. Or where you're like, is this really, really true, and am I convicted about it? And you were just completely, it's like, You sat there for 2 days, can't stop, that's interesting. That's kind of where the Gentiles were.
yeah. And I mean, nowadays it's so easy for me to be angry when I hear the phrase open mind. I'm like, oh, gross. I don't want one of those. But I mean, if you were a Jew, you needed to have somewhat of an open mind to be able to accept the Gentiles could be a brother among you. And so, I don't know, I think you have to have a discerning mind, but a discerning mind is somewhat open.
Absolutely. All right, Dennis and then Nancy, and then Craig, and
Like she said, that bad G word, It's funny, they were willing to hear about another sect of the magic J word, you
Mm-hmm.
know, but boy, you say that G word, they were all, but anyway, does anybody here have, other translations? I got a New American Standard in my hand,
Okay.
but I would like somebody to read me in, one or two other ones, verse 27, about the second half of verse 27. There's a point that I see here that.
I can read you the ESV if somebody else
Okay, go ahead.
wants to find another version. So I'll start. And their eyes have closed. Or do you want all of 27?
You can.
Okay. For the people's heart has grown dull, and their ears can barely hear, and their eyes have closed, lest they should see with their eyes, and hear with their ears, and understand with their heart. And in turn, I would heal them.
Okay, anybody else got another one?
I like this CEV for understanding, just 27, because it starts
Yeah,
at 26.
about the second half of 27.
You cannot see or hear or understand. If you could, you would turn to me and I would heal you.
Okay, well, yours, Harold, says what mine says.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, halfway through, otherwise they might see with their eyes and hear with their ears and understand with their heart and return, and I would heal them. I have read and heard people say that our heart is most deceitful
Mhm.
among all things, above all things, and this and that, and I've even talked along that way that we gotta just go with our head and forget about our heart if we're a Christian, and all that kind of stuff. God don't want us to use our crummy heart. He wants us to use our head and words. But by golly, right here it says, understand with their heart and do what is right.
Mm-hmm.
I am no longer, after reading this for probably 100th time in my life, under the thing that God gave us a heart and says, but don't try, it's just total junk.
No. Well, you can't take, well, we're almost out of time, and that's a big old thing. You can't take that either way, because we have the human side of it. We say, we must be spiritual with our minds only. There's groups that say we must be spiritual with our hearts only. Here's the thing. Take your logic and your emotion. That's how I look at it, right? Because that's me as a person. Satan can manipulate both of those things. We all know people that have overeducated themselves out of faith, completely into a religion of themselves. We all know people that have emotionally worked themselves out of the truth of God. And I'm going to say, I don't think it's them that's done that. I think it's been Satan working them towards that. And so the point here is we have logic and emotion right there by Paul. Listen, hear, understand, and then in your heart, right?
And my
So.
version says converted.
Converted,
And be converted and I would heal them.
which is a good word because we're going from Judaism to Christianity, basically, right?
And maybe I was reading when you talked about 25, but when he's talking about I, me, we, you, it's the Holy Spirit that would heal you,
Mm-hmm.
not Paul. Not, it's Isaiah talking.
Mm-hmm. All right, Nancy, I got to get you.
Okay, so I just find it amazing that these Jewish scholars and these people that are supposed to know the Old Testament
Yeah.
don't realize the promise made to Abraham, their father, that through his descendants all families of the earth shall be blessed. That was the promise made to Abraham. Through his descendants, everyone will be blessed. But yet they can't accept the Gentiles, some of them.
Well, and
You know?
we know that the Jews had a pride issue. We know that the Jews had a teaching issue where they just avoided to teach. And even if we took those away, we could still say the same comment about Christians today. We could still say, they read their whole New Testament. I'm not going to say that. We know, most of us know people that'll read this entire New Testament, and when I read the New Testament, one word comes to mind, and it's love. And we know people that can read the same exact New Testament and say hate. We can. And so I'm saying what the Jews they had Isaiah. They should have read this. They should have known this. But yet they missed it because of their own pride, because of their lack of teaching, their lack of understanding. So same thing can be said about us today. That's why we need to make sure we do read and understand what the Scriptures are saying.
Pray before you read, so that God will open your heart to see the truth instead of what you
less of me, more of you type of thing. Yeah. All right, Dennis.
He uses the same, maybe the very same passages that Philip, talking to the unicorn, used Isaiah the prophet and taught about Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And now I've run into people, I've read people, I've heard people say, we can't use the Old Testament. Everything in the New is completely different. It wipes out, nullifies, and embarrasses and abolishes the Old. You can teach Jesus somehow from the book of Isaiah. Because
Absolutely.
Philip and Paul does it, and Paul says, imitate me, because I imitate Christ. A thing I owe the class, though, early in the game, I asked about the chariot. I found out a few things, but not definitive, but chariot is only used in Acts chapter 8 in the New Testament. It's used a lot in the Old Testament. And I don't think from what I've read that it necessarily means the neat one with Yul Brynner standing in it, a cool two-seater, with the spears and everything, or on Ben-Hur. It would be the Corvettes and sports car models, or the neat F-16 Falcon war machines. Chariot, some of the scholars say in the New Testament simply means any animal-drawn thing. One of them went so far as to say an oxen-drawn wagon.
Oh.
So, get your, okay, and that makes it where it makes sense that Philip could run up to it and catch it, if that was from behind. And he could catch it, and also they were sitting.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't see that in the Yul Brynner thing.
Okay. Yeah. All right. We are out of time. Craig, did you have something you needed to say?
No, we'll be all right.
You're good? Okay. Well, thank you guys. That is the book of Acts. And when we transition here into Romans next week, we'll go from the planting of the church and the establishing, and we're going to move into who is the church now. And we're going to go to the first group in the order that we're reading it, okay? Let me say that differently. And Paul's going to be talking to them about how to be the church. That's going to start in Romans. All right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
We just need rain.
Once you get it all
We can get dressed out.